The chamber
It's
hums
such a
with the
pleasure
usual
to be
static
here
of
with you today.
politics.
The feeling is
Paper
mutual. We're
shuffling,
excited to share this
murmurs
moment.
echoing, cameras
It's
poised
such a
for another
pleasure to be here
forgettable
with you today.
exchange.
The feeling is
But
mutual.
then,
We're excited to
without
share this
warning,
moment.
Senator Jerry Moran leans toward the microphone. His voice cuts through the noise, calm but electric. "I may not agree with Representative Crockett on every issue," he says, "but I'll tell you this. She speaks with courage that this country needs more of." The room stills. Eyes widen. A pause thick enough to taste hangs in the air. On one side, Jasmine Crockett blinks, her composure flickering between disbelief and guarded pride. Across the aisle, aides exchange frantic glances, whispering as if trying to rewind time. Reporters freeze mid-typing. The gallery tilts forward, sensing something historic or dangerous. A single sentence has cracked the script Washington runs on, and no one knows the next line. Then come the vibrations. Phones buzzing, notifications lighting up. Hashtags are already forming, alliances trembling. It's not just what Moran said, it's who he said it to. For the first time in a long time, respect, simple human respect, feels like rebellion. But what came after that single sentence? No one in Washington saw coming.
Rewind the clock. Before that stunned silence, before the cameras caught Moran's words mid-air, the country was already simmering, a nation split not just by ideology, but by exhaustion. Every headline felt like a dare, every debate a battlefield. Politics wasn't conversation anymore, it was combat. Jasmine Crockett had become a lightning rod in that storm, young, sharp, unflinchingly herself. She spoke in sound bites that cut and truths that burned. Her supporters saw her as fearless, a voice for those long dismissed. Her critics called her everything but what she was, unbought, unbothered, unstoppable. When she entered a room, sparks followed. Jerry Moran was her mirror image in tone, not in principle. A veteran lawmaker who still believed in pauses, in handshakes, in the quiet dignity of listening. The kind of man who measured twice before speaking once. In a Congress addicted to performance, his restraint was its own rebellion. They were opposites, lightning and oak, destined to stand on opposite sides of the same storm. Yet beneath that storm ran a shared exhaustion. Both knew the cost of noise. In this America, crossing the aisle wasn't compromise, it was betrayal. To praise the other side was to sign your own political obituary. Every word was weaponized, every gesture dissected for weakness. So when Moran's voice cut through that static with grace instead of anger, it didn't just challenge the chamber, it challenged the culture. It dared Washington to remember what decency looked like. And somewhere in that daring moment, between Crockett's stunned silence and the country's collective gasp, the stage was set for something no one expected. A collision between two people too different to agree, yet too human to ignore each other. But what made Jerry Moran break ranks that day had roots no one knew existed.
The real villain never wears a name tag. It doesn't sit behind one desk or speak with one voice. It hums beneath every news cycle, every viral clip, every outrage headline. It's the machine, invisible, relentless, that feeds on division like oxygen. The politics of performance, the business of anger. It starts small. A tweet, a soundbite, a smirk taken out of context. Someone posts it, someone twists it, someone monetizes it. And before the truth can even breathe, the algorithms take over. Anger sells. Nuance doesn't. Every outrage fuels another. Every clip is sharpened into a blade. Cable pundits lean in, eyes glittering under studio lights. Can you believe what she said? Can you believe who he praised? Their tones drip with mock disbelief, the kind that keeps viewers hooked through the next commercial break. The louder the argument, the higher the ratings. The more divided the audience, the more predictable the profit. In this world, showing respect to the other side isn't courage, it's heresy. A single word of empathy becomes betrayal. Politicians learn the rules fast. Never pause, never concede, never compliment. Your tribe must always be right. The other must always be evil. That's how the machine stays fed. Jasmine Crockett, with her unfiltered fire, became an easy target. Clips of her impassioned defenses were spliced, re-edited, stripped of context. To her critics, she was chaos. To her supporters, she was the mirror of their own struggle, unapologetic and proud. Jerry Moran, meanwhile, represented the opposite problem: too calm, too polite, too unwilling to fight dirty. He wasn't flashy enough for the cameras, not angry enough for the feeds. Together they symbolize the very thing the machine couldn't process: disagreement without disdain, humanity without spectacle. So when Moran praised her that day, it wasn't just political, it was sacrilege. The system could not compute decency. Within minutes, talking heads began their chorus. What's his angle? Is he pandering? Has he lost his spine? Their voices blurred into a chorus of contempt, the soundtrack of a system allergic to sincerity. And yet, beneath the noise, something deeper stirred. Ordinary people, teachers, nurses, young voters, replayed the clip and whispered, that felt different. They couldn't name it, but they felt it. It wasn't politics, it was relief. Because the true antagonist isn't Jerry Moran's party or Jasmine Crockett's passion. It's the invisible hand that profits from keeping them apart. The culture that punishes grace, that turns empathy into weakness, that tells Americans dignity is naive. That's what Moran was standing against when he spoke. Not a person, not a party, a poison. But what made him risk everything to say it had roots no one yet knew, roots that reached far beyond politics into something deeply personal.
Before she ever stepped onto the marble floors of Congress, Jasmine Crockett was fighting in the trenches, not for headlines, not for clout, but for people no one else would defend. In a cramped courtroom in Dallas, she stood beside mothers evicted without notice, teenagers charged for mistakes that wealthier kids could afford to forget. She wasn't polished then, she was relentless. Her voice, sharp and unshaken, carried the weight of every client who couldn't afford to lose. That courtroom was her first arena, and she learned fast. Justice doesn't come gift-wrapped. You fight for it, inch by inch, word by word, even when the system looks at you like you don't belong in the room. So when Crockett arrived in Washington, she didn't come to blend in. She came to challenge the silence that too many had accepted as normal. In hearings, she spoke with rhythm, fire mixed with fact, and when she spoke, people listened, even those who wished they didn't. Clips of her clashes went viral, her voice rising not in anger but in command, the kind that makes power flinch. With every speech, she gained admirers and enemies in equal measure. Commentators called her too loud, too combative, too much. They said it as if passion was a flaw, as if confidence was chaos. But Crockett understood what they didn't. Being too much was the only way women like her were ever heard at all. Behind the cameras, the pressure was suffocating. Staffers whispered, colleagues smirked, networks clipped her sound bites into outrage candy. Yet she didn't flinch. Every time she took that microphone, she carried her community with her. The single mothers, the young black girls watching from afar, the sons of immigrants who'd been told to wait their turn. Her defiance wasn't noise, it was heritage. And still, it cost her. Nights alone in her office, scrolling through comment sections that called her every name but her own.
the exhaustion of being both symbol and soldier. But each morning she returned to the fight, makeup flawless, heel steady, voice unshaken. Because Jasmine Crockett knew something Washington often forgets. Authenticity is power. When Jerry Moran praised her that day, it wasn't the flattery of a seasoned politician. It was recognition, the kind that can only come from someone who's seen courage up close. He didn't agree with her politics. He respected her conviction. And for a moment, that respect crossed the divide louder than any slogan ever could. She didn't smile right away. She didn't have to. The power of that moment wasn't in her expression, it was in the silence that followed. The silence of a chamber unaccustomed to grace. For years, she had been called radical for refusing to bow, difficult for demanding respect, unprofessional for showing passion. And yet, here was a senator from the opposite side acknowledging what her critics could. That standing firm in your truth isn't arrogance, it's integrity. That's the heartbeat of Jasmine Crockett's rise. Not perfection, but persistence. Not approval, but authenticity. She became the lightning Washington couldn't control, the voice the machine couldn't silence. And in that chamber, when her fiercest critic became her most unexpected ally, something shifted. Not just for her, but for everyone watching who had ever been told they were too much. But no one could have predicted how that single spark of respect would ignite the storm that came next.
The hearing room buzzed with tension before the gavel even struck. Cameras clicked like insects in a swarm, lenses already searching for their next viral moment. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, eyes locked forward, her pen tapping softly against the desk, a rhythm that could almost be mistaken for calm. Across from her, another congressman launched into a familiar tirade about decorum, about tone, about everything except the truth she was trying to expose. She waited, listened, and then, when it was her turn, she leaned toward the microphone and the air changed. Her voice came low, precise, deliberate. Each word hit like a scalpel, carving through the hypocrisy that filled the room. "It's not tone that breaks this institution," she said evenly. "It's the double standards you refuse to admit exist." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. The camera panned to the faces around her. Tight lips, narrowed eyes, uncomfortable glances. Some smirked. Others shifted in their seats, pretending to read notes they'd already memorized. She wasn't just confronting a policy. She was confronting a culture. Within minutes, the clips hit Twitter. Pundits spun it like clockwork. Crockett lashes out again. Democrat goes too far. The familiar chorus rose. Predictable, performative, profitable. The machine whirred back to life, feeding on outrage. But inside the room, something else was happening. Jerry Moran sat a few rows back, hands folded, his gaze steady on Crockett. He'd seen hundreds of hearings like this one, the theater, the noise, the tribal applause, but this felt different. Her words weren't about ego, they were about integrity, about the fatigue of fighting the same battle in different suits. And for reasons he couldn't yet name, Moran felt the weight of it. As she spoke, his mind flickered to his own memories, the quiet constituents he'd met who'd lost faith in politics, the young volunteers who still believed they could fix it. He saw in her defiance the same restless hope he used to feel. She closed her statement with one final line, not shouted, but spoken with the calm of someone who knew exactly who she was. "If truth makes you uncomfortable, then maybe it's time you asked why." A ripple of murmurs spread across the table. One colleague scoffed under his breath. Another rolled her eyes. But Moran didn't move. His jaw tightened. His hand, resting on the desk, curled into a quiet fist. The chairman cleared his throat, trying to restore the performance to order, but the energy had shifted. Something had been exposed, something raw and undeniable. Crockett leaned back, unbothered, her gaze steady and unflinching. Across the aisle, Moran exhaled slowly, eyes still fixed on her. Respect wasn't supposed to look like this, but it did. And then, in that pregnant pause between applause and backlash, the senator began to rise from his seat.
For a moment, the air in the committee room felt dense enough to shatter. The fluorescent lights hummed above. The low murmur of aides rustled like wind before a storm. Then, Jerry Moran stood. It wasn't dramatic at first. No one even noticed. The senator from Kansas had never been the type to command attention by volume. But when he rose, the room seemed to feel it. Conversations faltered. Crockett, mid-note, glanced up. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and leaned toward the microphone. When he spoke, the tone was steady, unhurried, every syllable wrapped in quiet conviction. "Madam Chair," he began, "I know what I'm about to say may surprise some of my colleagues. It may even disappoint a few." He paused, letting the murmurs ripple. "But I want to acknowledge Representative Crockett for something I don't see enough of in this body anymore. Courage." The word hung there, raw and unguarded. Cameras swiveled toward him, snapping to focus. Crockett blinked, unsure whether to brace herself or breathe. Moran continued. "We spend so much time in this chamber talking past each other that we forget why we're here. I don't agree with Representative Crockett on many issues, but I'll tell you this. She stands in her truth. She speaks with conviction, not calculation. And whether you like her or not, that's something this Congress could use a lot more of." Gasps, shifting seats. One senator whispered, "Is he serious?" Another checked if the mic was still live. But Moran didn't waver. His hands rested calmly on the table, his voice unwavering. "This isn't about politics. It's about integrity. It takes courage to confront power, and even greater courage to do it knowing you'll be misunderstood. I see that in her." Across the aisle, Crockett froze. The woman so often caricatured as fiery and unflinching suddenly looked human, almost vulnerable. Her lips parted, but no words came. 1,000 battles played behind her eyes, years of being talked over, doubted, dismissed, and now, in the most unlikely place, from the most unlikely person, she was being seen. Click, flash, click. The press gallery erupted like gunfire. Tweets flew within seconds. Moran praises Crockett on live mic. Bipartisan shockwave in committee hearing. Hashtags bloomed across timelines. Hashtag courage over party. Hashtag respect across the aisle. Hashtag finally adult in the room. Some cheered, some fumed. One commentator posted, "This is what leadership looks like." Another replied, "Or weakness. Depends who's clapping." But beneath the noise, something deeper was stirring. Ordinary Americans, the exhausted middle that never trended, were sharing the clip, writing, "This gave me chills. This is what we used to be." Back in the chamber, Moran wasn't finished. "We are not enemies," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the silence. "We are stewards of the same democracy. And I, for one, will never apologize for showing respect to someone who fights for what they believe in, even if it's not what I believe." The chair tried to interject, gavel in hand, but stopped mid-motion. The room had stilled into something sacred. Not applause, not outrage, just silence. The kind of silence that holds truth, like breath. Moran's eyes drifted toward Crockett. "Representative," he said, nodding once, "you've got fire, and this place could use a little more of it." It was small, just a nod, just a sentence, but it cracked something open. Crockett's expression softened, a quiet respect replacing the armor she always wore. For the first time that day, she smiled. Not wide, not performative, just enough for the camera to catch a flicker of mutual understanding. For one impossible second, Washington felt human again. No shouting, no tribal applause, but two people divided by ideology, united by integrity. Then the spell began to break. Staffers whispered, phones buzzed, reporters scrambled for statements. Aides from Moran's office were already drafting damage control memos, their screens lighting up with texts that read, "What was he thinking?" But Moran didn't care. As he sat back down, he knew he'd done something rare, something dangerous and decent at once. His face betrayed no regret, only a quiet steadiness, like a man who'd finally stopped pretending. Crockett lowered her gaze briefly, exhaling through a smile she couldn't quite hide. It wasn't victory. It was validation. For all the noise that would follow, the pundits, the backlash, the spin, nothing could erase the purity of that moment. Two opposing forces had met, not in combat, but in truth. And as the cameras kept rolling, the world beyond that chamber began to take notice. Because once the applause faded, the backlash began, and it was brutal.
By nightfall, the clip had already become legend. Every network carried it. Every platform replayed it. The soundbite of Senator Jerry Moran saying, "She speaks with courage this country needs more of," echoed across timelines, stitched, subtitled, re-edited 1,000 different ways. In one version, a slow piano score underscored his words like a movie trailer for decency. In another, Crockett's stunned face looped beside text that read, "This is what respect looks like." Twitter, or what was left of it, burned through the night. Hashtag Moran Moment trended first. Then hashtag Crockett Courage. Then both merged into Dignity Wins. Commentators split instantly. One pundit sneered, "A Republican just handed Democrats a free campaign ad." Another replied, "No, he handed Americans something we forgot we wanted, honesty." The debate raged, but under the noise, something softer stirred. People felt moved. In Kansas, the phone lines at Moran's district office lit up like a Christmas tree. Calls poured in, half furious, half proud. One rancher left a message saying, "I don't agree with her, but the man's right. It takes guts to speak your mind." Others weren't so generous. Angry donors threatened to pull support, warning he'd gone soft. But Moran didn't flinch. In Texas, college campuses buzzed with energy. Students printed Crockett's line, "If truth makes you uncomfortable, ask why," on homemade posters, hanging them in hallways like modern protest art. TikTok filled with split-screen edits. On one side, Moran speaking. On the other, Crockett listening, her expression unreadable, dignified. Creators called it the clip that made America exhale. The internet, usually cruel, seemed, for a fleeting moment, capable of tenderness. Underneath partisan hot takes were unexpected comments. "This made me cry." "Maybe politics doesn't have to be all hate." "This gave me hope for my kids." Cable panels tried to reclaim control, to reframe the moment in familiar terms: strategy, calculation, optics. But their words fell flat. This wasn't strategy. It was sincerity, and America recognized it. The narration slows, pulling back from the chaos. The sound of overlapping headlines fades, replaced with the quiet hum of reflection. In the divide between Kansas and Texas, between right and left, something had flickered to life. The idea that maybe decency hadn't died, it had just been buried under noise. For one day, the nation seemed to breathe differently. Not in agreement, but in awareness.
Because beyond the hashtags, beyond the commentary, this moment had become a mirror, forcing every viewer to ask what kind of country they wanted to be. And yet, amid the storm of reactions, a quieter story began to unfold, one that would turn the shock into a statement and the statement into a movement.
In the days that followed, both Senator Moran and Representative Crockett granted interviews, speaking from very different corners of the political spectrum, yet echoing the same profound truth. Democracy thrives only when conversation replaces confrontation. Moran, measured and deliberate, emphasized restraint and recognition. "It's not about agreeing," he said quietly. "It's about acknowledging courage where it exists, even if it challenges your assumptions." His words carried the weight of a man who had watched decades of partisanship erode trust, who had seen compromise replaced by performance, and who, in that fleeting moment, chose principle over politics. Crockett, fiery as ever, responded with her trademark candor. "We don't have to see eye to eye to respect each other," she explained. "And if standing firm in your beliefs scares someone else, maybe that's their problem, not yours." Her voice, unwavering, resonated with those who had ever felt marginalized, silenced, or underestimated. Across interviews, on podcasts and news networks, she reframed the narrative. Courage isn't partisan, and civility isn't weakness. Together, their messages created a rare symmetry, a demonstration that leadership could transcend party lines without diluting principle. The narrative that had begun in a single chamber had now rippled across a nation accustomed to division. Viewers were drawn not to the sound bites, not to the partisan theatrics, but to the humanity in the exchange. It was a reminder that decency, when exercised bravely, can disrupt cynicism. The imagery of the moment lingered in public consciousness. Moran rising from his seat, steady and composed, Crockett absorbing the rare acknowledgement, her eyes softened yet fierce. The chamber, usually a stage for spectacle, had held a quiet truth. For those watching, it was a revelation that politics could be moral without being theatrical, principled without being pedantic. Narration pulls back to capture the broader significance. Courage does not belong to one party. Respect does not have an ideology. The collision of these two figures, so different in style yet united in conviction, reminded a wary country that character still matters. In classrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms, people replayed the clip not to debate policy, but to feel hope, a rare, unmanufactured sense that integrity could survive in public life. The moral crescendo swells as the script reflects on what this moment truly represents, a challenge to every citizen to demand more than outrage, more than spectacle, to recognize that disagreement is inevitable, but contempt is optional, that defending your values does not preclude acknowledging the humanity of another. In this rare intersection of respect and courage, the audience finds not just political theater, but a blueprint for engagement rooted in dignity. For Moran and Crockett, the aftermath was not applause or acclaim. It was the quiet validation that their actions could inspire reflection, even empathy, across an entrenched divide. The true victory lay in the subtle shift, a nation reminded that individuals, even from opposite sides of the aisle, can model the values they profess to hold dear. And as the camera pans one last time over the chamber now empty, the echo of that shared respect lingers. Two Americans, separated by ideology yet united by principle, proved that character still matters. The lesson is clear, and it resonates far beyond politics. Courage is timeless, respect is revolutionary, and when dignity triumphs over division, the world, however briefly, remembers what it can be. But even as the nation absorbed this truth,
A new chapter was quietly beginning, one that would test the endurance of that courage in ways no one could yet imagine.
Jerry Moran praises Jasmine Crockett publicly, and what happened next stunned America. One sentence, spoken with calm conviction, rippled across chambers, timelines, and living rooms, reminding a divided nation that courage and respect still matter. In a culture addicted to outrage, this simple act of acknowledgement became a mirror, reflecting what leadership could look like when principle outweighs performance. It wasn't policy that captured the nation's attention. It wasn't strategy, slogans, or spin. It was integrity, a fleeting, rare, human moment that reminded viewers what happens when dignity triumphs over division. Across social media, classrooms, and dinner tables, people paused, debated, and most importantly, felt hope. If decency shocks the system, maybe it's time to shock it more often. Share this story. Talk about it. Challenge the cynicism that tells us civility is weakness and courage is partisan. Be part of the conversation that refuses to accept division as inevitable. Because moments like this aren't just headlines. They're calls to action, opportunities to demand, to model, and to live the values that truly make America exceptional. The choice is ours. Will we answer it?